Cowboy's baby wouldn't stop crying on the stagecoach until a single mom did the unthinkable. The stagecoach rattled along the uneven road, its wooden wheels creaking with each bump. Inside, passengers were jostled back and forth, holding on tightly to their belongings, their faces smudged with dust and sweat. The air inside the coach was thick with tension, the smell of leather, sweat, and dry dust mixing together. It was not a comfortable journey, but it was the only way to travel across these wild lands. Among the passengers was Jake, a tall, strong cowboy with sun-baked skin and hands calloused from years of hard work. He had the kind of face that carried both determination and fatigue, the kind of look that came from many long days riding under the blazing sun, working cattle, and living in a life that was often harsh and unforgiving. But today, his attention was not on the landscape outside or the discomfort of the ride. It was on his little daughter, Lily, who was crying her heart out in his arms. Lily was only a few months old, with soft, tiny fingers that gripped Jake's shirt and big, bright eyes that were now scrunched in distress. No matter what Jake did, she would not stop crying. He rocked her gently, hoping that the rhythmic movement would soothe her. He whispered softly, There, Lily, it's all right, little one." But the crying only grew louder, a sharp, piercing sound that echoed inside the wooden coach and seemed to make every bump in the road feel 10 times worse. Jake's frustration began to rise. He had faced many challenges in his life, long days under the sun, stampeding cattle, rattlesnakes in the grass, but nothing tested him quite like calming a crying baby. He had tried everything he could think of. He shifted her weight from one arm to the other, patting her back in a steady rhythm. He hummed songs his own mother used to sing, though they were not very melodious. He even tried making silly faces, hoping to make her laugh, but nothing worked. Lily's cries seemed to pierce through every corner of the stagecoach, growing louder with every passing mile. Other passengers were starting to notice. A businessman with a stiff collar and a frown shook his head, muttering under his breath. "Good grief," he said. "How can anyone handle that noise?" Across the aisle, a woman clutched her bonnet tightly, looking at Jake with sympathetic eyes but clearly wishing he could make the baby stop. A group of cowboys at the back tried not to pay attention, but even they could not ignore the constant wailing. Some sighed, others muttered complaints, and a few gave Jake awkward glances, unsure whether to offer advice or simply stay out of the way. Jake felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He knew it was not the baby's fault. She was just hungry, tired, or uncomfortable, but the judgment from others made him feel like he was failing. He clenched his jaw and tried to take deep breaths, hoping to calm himself so he could calm Lily. He adjusted her blanket, checked her diaper, and even offered her a small cloth to suck on. Still, the cries continued, high-pitched and insistent, echoing through the coach like a little alarm bell. As the stagecoach bounced over rocks and ruts, Jake's mind wandered to the long journey ahead. They still had hours to go, and the sun was mercilessly hot outside. He imagined the dusty towns they would pass, the endless plains stretching out to the horizon, and the long stretches of road that had no end in sight. The thought of having to endure Lily's cries for all that time made him feel exhausted even before they had gone far. He glanced around at the other passengers, feeling both embarrassed and desperate. No one seemed to understand the bond he felt with Lily. This was not just a baby crying for attention. This was his daughter, a tiny life that depended on him for comfort, protection, and love. Every attempt he made to soothe her was an act of care, even if it appeared futile to others. Yet he could not help but notice the judgmental eyes, the impatient sighs, the way a few people were openly annoyed. It made him feel small, though he knew deep down that he was doing his best. The stagecoach jolted again, sending Jake and Lily up and down in rhythm with the wooden seat. He held her tighter, whispering softly, "It's all right, Lily, we'll get through this, just you and me." But no matter what he said, the baby's cries continued, relentless and loud. It was as if she could sense the tension in the coach, reacting not just to her discomfort but also to the anxiety building in her father. Outside the window, the world rolled by in a blur of brown and gold. Cacti dotted the landscape, their spines glinting in the sunlight. Dust devils twirled in the distance, little tornadoes of dry sand dancing across the plains. The stagecoach creaked and groaned, its wheels grinding over stones and uneven ground. The sound of hooves from the horses pulling the coach clattered rhythmically against the dirt road. But inside, the only sound that mattered was Lily's crying, a constant reminder that this journey was far from easy. Jake's thoughts drifted to the night before, when he had tried to prepare for this trip. He had packed supplies, bottles, and blankets, hoping that everything would go smoothly. He had imagined Lily resting quietly in his arms while he enjoyed the ride, watching the plains stretch out endlessly under the big blue sky. But reality had proven to be much harsher. The baby's cries seemed to mock his expectations, reminding him that the frontier was not forgiving and that parenthood came with its own challenges, sometimes bigger than stampeding cattle or raging storms. A sense of helplessness began to creep over him. He was strong, capable, and experienced in many things, but calming a crying baby was testing him in ways he had never imagined. He shifted his weight in the seat, trying to find a comfortable position for Lily, rocking her back and forth in hopes of lulling her to sleep. He murmured stories about the ranch, the horses, and the wide-open plains, hoping the sound of his voice would bring comfort. But Lily's cries only grew louder, a tiny storm inside the rattling stagecoach. The passengers began to exchange glances, some with concern, others with irritation. A little girl sitting nearby clutched her doll, wide-eyed at the constant noise. The businessman furrowed his brow, muttering complaints about travel and noise. Yet despite the tension, Jake refused to let his frustration show outwardly. He reminded himself that Lily's needs came first, that his duty as a father was to comfort her no matter what others thought. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The sun climbed higher and the stagecoach continued to bump and jolt over the rocky terrain. Jake's arms ached from holding Lily, his shoulders were tense, and sweat ran down his back. He whispered softly, trying to soothe her with the gentle rhythm of his voice. He remembered the advice of other fathers he had known on the ranch. Patience, calmness, and gentle motion were key, yet it felt as though nothing worked. Lily's cries pierced through the sound of the wheels, the horses, and the rattling of the wooden coach, echoing in every corner. As the day wore on, Jake refused to give up. He knew that babies cried for many reasons: hunger, discomfort, tiredness, or simply the need for attention. He tried to anticipate her needs, checking her diaper, offering her a bottle, and adjusting her blanket. Still, nothing seemed to soothe her. His heart ached as he realized that sometimes, even the strongest cowboy could feel powerless in the face of a child's distress. And so, the stagecoach rumbled on, bouncing over stones and dust, carrying Jake, Lily, and the other passengers across the endless plains. Jake held his daughter tightly, whispering promises and comforting words, hoping that soon, somehow, the crying would end. Every passenger watched in silence, some with sympathy, some with impatience, as the cowboy and his baby struggled together against the relentless noise of the frontier road. The journey had only just begun, and already it had tested patience, endurance, and the strength of a father's love. The stagecoach jolted and rattled along the uneven road, carrying its passengers through the endless expanse of the dusty plains. Inside, the tension was still thick. Jake clutched his daughter Lily tightly, whispering gentle words and rocking her back and forth in a steady rhythm. Despite his best efforts, her cries still pierced the air, echoing through the coach and bouncing off the wooden walls. The other passengers were growing restless, their sighs and whispered complaints blending with the baby's high-pitched wails. The rattling of the wheels over rocks and ruts finally slowed as the coach approached a small outpost on the frontier. The wooden buildings were sun-bleached and simple, with signs swinging loosely above doors. A few horses were tied outside, their manes flicking in the hot wind. Dust hung in the air like a fine veil, and the smell of fresh hay mixed with the dry heat of the plains. The driver slowed the horses and called out, "Water and supplies. Quick stop, folks." Jake took a deep breath, grateful for the brief pause. He shifted Lily carefully in his arms, trying to soothe her as best he could while the coach came to a full stop. Outside, the coach door creaked open, letting in a wave of hot, dusty air. Passengers peered out, eager to stretch their legs, refill water canteens, and grab a moment of relief from the jolting ride. It was at that moment that she appeared. Clara. She stepped lightly onto the stagecoach, carrying only a small bag at her side. There was something calm and steady in the way she moved, as if the chaos of the world didn't touch her. Her clothes were simple but neat, and her eyes carried a quiet confidence that immediately drew the attention of those around her. She looked like someone who had faced hardship, but had learned to stand tall no matter what. The other passengers barely noticed her at first. They were too caught up in their own discomforts, the heat, the dust, the constant movement of the coach. But Clara's presence had a subtle effect on the atmosphere. There was no hurry in her movements, no panic in her expression, only an air of quiet observation. She glanced at the passengers with polite interest, then her eyes settled on the center of the coach, where Jake struggled with Lily. Jake noticed her too. At first, he felt defensive. He had been trying everything he could think of, and the baby's cries seemed to mock his efforts. Who was this stranger, watching so calmly, as if she could somehow judge the situation better than he could? He tightened his hold on Lily, whispering again, "It's all right, little one, just a little longer." But curiosity prickled at him. There was something different about this woman, something he couldn't quite place. Clara didn't say a word at first. She simply stepped closer, observing the scene quietly. She noticed the way Jake's arms were tense, the way he was trying to manage his frustration while comforting the baby. She noticed the tiredness in his eyes, the way he kept glancing at the other passengers as if looking for approval or relief. She could see that he was a man doing his best, and that his best, for all his effort, was still not enough to calm Lily. Without making a sudden move or startling anyone, Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a small cloth. She didn't wave it around or make a show of it. She simply held it gently in her hand and smiled softly at Lily. Jake raised an eyebrow, unsure what she was planning. The passengers glanced around, some curious, some skeptical, wondering if this stranger really had anything to offer. Clara knelt slightly, bringing herself closer to the baby without rushing or forcing attention. She spoke in a soft, steady voice, the kind that carried calm rather than command. "Hello there, little one," she said. "It's all right, everything is all right." There was no pressure in her tone, no urgency, just a gentle invitation for Lily to settle. At first, Lily did not respond. Her cries continued, though the pitch softened slightly, as if she were puzzled by the stranger's calm presence. Jake felt a mix of relief and skepticism. Could this really work? He had tried everything he knew, rocking, humming, making funny faces, even walking around the coach with her. And yet, this quiet woman, merely observing and speaking gently, seemed to have an effect he couldn't understand. Clara moved slowly, letting Lily become familiar with her presence. She extended the cloth toward the baby, letting her tiny hands touch it. She smiled warmly, and for the first time Lily's cries faltered. Her big eyes opened wide, taking in this new figure with curiosity rather than alarm. Jake felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this stranger had something he didn't. The other passengers began to notice the change. Murmurs spread quietly through the coach. "Look, the baby's stopping," one whispered. Another nudged his companion, saying, "I think she's doing something that man can't." Jake felt a mixture of pride and embarrassment. Pride that someone was helping his daughter, embarrassment that he couldn't manage it alone. But above all, he felt relief, a weight lifting from his chest that he hadn't realized had been there. Clara continued to move slowly and deliberately. She didn't try to take Lily from Jake, didn't attempt to show him up. She simply offered calm, patience, and attention, qualities that Jake realized were just as important as strength or experience. Lily's cries softened further, and the baby's small body began to relax against her father's chest. The tight grip on her little arms loosened, her tiny fingers unclenching. For the first time in what felt like hours, Jake felt Lily's body go still, her breathing even out, and a sense of peace begin to settle over the coach. Jake's eyes met Clara's, and he saw a gentle understanding there. No words were needed. She had done something simple but remarkable, something he had not thought to try. She had shown patience, calmness, and a quiet confidence that resonated with the baby. And just like that, the impossible seemed possible. As the passengers watched, a new atmosphere filled the coach. The tension that had hung like a cloud began to lift. People who had been frowning now smiled faintly. A little girl sitting nearby hugged her doll, a sense of wonder in her eyes. Even the businessman at the front leaned back, shaking his head with disbelief, muttering, "Well, I'll be. That actually worked." The stagecoach, once a space filled with irritation and impatience, now carried a quiet sense of relief and admiration for the woman who had quietly stepped in to help. Jake, holding Lily with renewed confidence, felt a profound gratitude toward Clara. He had been struggling, exhausted, and unsure, and she had simply shown him a way to help his daughter without judgment or hurry. The baby, sensing the calm, continued to relax, her cries finally replaced by soft coos and curious glances at the world around her. Jake whispered softly, "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you." Clara smiled modestly, nodding. She didn't boast or call attention to herself. She simply had a quiet presence that spoke louder than words ever could. "She's a strong little one," she said gently. "Sometimes, all they need is patience and a calm voice. That's all it takes." Jake nodded, feeling a new respect not just for her, but for the kind of quiet strength she represented, strength that did not need to shout, fight, or prove itself, but simply existed in action. The stagecoach resumed its journey, the wheels once again clattering over stones and ruts. But the mood inside had changed completely. Lily rested peacefully in Jake's arms, looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes. Jake felt a renewed sense of hope and determination. He realized that sometimes the help we need comes from unexpected places, from people who enter our lives quietly, offering wisdom through simple actions rather than grand gestures. The passengers, too, carried a sense of amazement and respect. They had witnessed something rare, a stranger stepping into a difficult situation and making a difference without demand or fanfare. Some whispered quietly to each other, sharing the story, while others simply watched in awe, seeing a small miracle unfold before their eyes. As the plane stretched out endlessly beyond the windows, the stagecoach moved forward under the hot sun. Jake held Lily tightly, feeling both relief and gratitude, and glanced once more at Clara. She had entered quietly, observed patiently, and done something remarkable. For Jake, the journey was no longer just about reaching the next town. It was about learning, understanding, and witnessing the quiet courage of someone who knew that sometimes the smallest acts could have the biggest impact. And in that rattling, dusty stagecoach, amidst the endless plains and the harsh frontier wind, a quiet partnership had begun, between a father and his daughter, and between a man who had thought he knew all and a woman who showed him there was more to learn, even on the open road. The stagecoach had resumed its bumpy journey across the vast, sun-scorched plains. Dust swirled outside the windows, caught in the rays of the afternoon sun, while inside, a calm settled over the passengers. The earlier tension from Lily's cries had softened into a quiet curiosity. Everyone watched quietly as Jake held his daughter, still looking both exhausted and relieved. Clara sat nearby, her small bag resting at her side, her eyes calm but alert, watching Lily with a gentle focus that spoke of experience and understanding. Despite the calm, Jake knew that the baby's peace was fragile. Lily's coos and soft gurgles were reassuring, but he could still sense the little tension in her tiny body, the subtle twitch of her hands, the restless movement of her legs. He had learned enough to know that babies were unpredictable. What worked for a few minutes might not last, and the cries could return at any moment. He shifted her carefully in his arms, whispering, "It's all right, Lily, we're doing good." But deep down, he felt a flicker of anxiety. Clara, sensing his concern, leaned slightly closer, not to interfere but to offer a silent suggestion. She spoke softly, almost as if sharing a secret. Sometimes it's not just about rocking or singing. Sometimes they need something they can't see, something they can feel. Her voice was calm, warm, and steady, and Jake found himself listening intently, curious about what she might mean. For a moment, Jake did nothing but watch, unsure if he should interrupt or question her. But before he could speak, Clara moved with a quiet confidence that made him step back without thinking. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn object, a soft, handmade doll, its fabric faded and stitching a little frayed. She held it carefully, showing it to Lily, letting the baby see it without forcing attention. The other passengers watched, intrigued and a little puzzled. What was this woman planning to do? Clara didn't speak. She simply held the doll near Lily and began to move it gently, almost like it was floating in the air. She rocked it back and forth, letting the soft motion capture the baby's attention. She whispered a few words in a soothing, rhythmic tone, and the effect was almost immediate. Lily's wide eyes followed the movement of the doll, her tiny fingers stretching toward it with curiosity. The cries, which had been on the edge of returning, softened further, replaced by a cautious coo of interest. Jake's heart lifted. He had tried toys, songs, faces, and rocking, but nothing had captured her attention like this. There was something about the calm, patient way Clara held and moved the doll, combined with her soft words, that seemed to reach deep into Lily's little mind. The baby's body relaxed almost imperceptibly, her little shoulders lowering, her hands unclenching, and the tension in her tiny face easing. Clara's actions were subtle but deliberate. She didn't try to take Lily from Jake. She didn't force her attention or demand focus. Instead, she created a small, safe world around the baby, one where curiosity replaced frustration and calm replaced anxiety. Her voice remained soft, her movements deliberate, and her eyes kind. She was performing what Jake could only describe as the unthinkable, not by breaking rules or doing anything shocking, but by using a method so gentle, so completely different from anything he had tried, that it felt almost magical. Other passengers began to notice. Murmurs spread quietly through the coach. "She's calming the baby," someone whispered. A cowboy sitting across from Jake leaned forward slightly, tipping his hat back in surprise. Never seen anything like that," he muttered. Even the businessman, who had been frowning with irritation earlier, leaned back in his seat, shaking his head in disbelief. It was as if the simple act of patience and presence had created a ripple of quiet amazement throughout the stagecoach. Jake watched closely, fascinated. He had always been a man of action, used to solving problems with strength, speed, and determination. But Clara's method required none of those things. It required patience, observation, and an understanding that went beyond instinct, an understanding that Jake realized he had never truly possessed. He whispered softly to her, almost afraid to disturb the moment. I don't know how you're doing it." Clara smiled faintly, her eyes never leaving Lily. "It's not magic," she said softly. "It's just noticing what she needs and giving it without forcing it. Sometimes they need something they can feel more than hear. Sometimes they need calm more than noise. And sometimes they just need someone who believes they can be calm. Jake nodded slowly, taking in her words. He realized that in his desperation, he had been trying too hard, trying to control the baby's behavior rather than understanding her needs. Clara's approach was different. It was not about control but connection. She had shown him that even a small gesture, done with thought and care, could achieve what brute force or constant movement could not. For Lily, the effect was transformative. Her cries had stopped almost entirely, replaced by soft coos and fascinated gazes at the doll. Her tiny hands reached out and touched it gently, her legs kicking softly in rhythm with the gentle rocking motion Clara gave it. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him, mixed with awe at the calm strength of the woman who had quietly stepped in to help. The stagecoach continued to bounce along the rocky path, but the atmosphere inside had changed completely. What had been tension and frustration was now replaced by quiet amazement and a sense of peace. The passengers, who had been restless and impatient just moments before, now sat in silent observation. Even the little girl with the doll beside her seemed transfixed, watching the baby and the calm woman who had captured her attention. Jake felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the heat of the sun. Gratitude and admiration filled him. Here was someone who had taken the impossible situation he had been struggling with for hours and transformed it with simple patience, quiet presence, and an unusual approach that he could barely comprehend. He realized with a sense of humility that there were lessons to be learned in unexpected ways. Strength was not always about action or grit. Sometimes it was about calmness, observation, and trust. Clara continued her gentle movements, her voice barely above a whisper now, her hands moving in a steady rhythm that seemed to soothe not just Lily, but the entire coach. Jake noticed that even the horses pulling the stagecoach seemed calmer, their steps steadier as if influenced by the tranquility inside the coach. The sun continued to shine brightly outside, the dust still swirling in little whirls, but inside, a quiet calm had settled, uniting passengers, father and child in a moment of shared relief. Jake shifted Lily slightly, letting her explore the doll with her tiny hands. She looked up at him and smiled faintly, a small, trusting expression that melted away every ounce of doubt and frustration he had felt earlier. He whispered, "See, you're all right now, we've got this." For the first time since the journey had begun, Jake truly believed it. With Clara's guidance, he understood that calming a baby was not about force. It was about connection, understanding, and the courage to try something unexpected. The rest of the journey, though still bumpy, felt lighter. Lily remained calm, occasionally glancing at the doll or at Jake's face, her soft coos filling the space with a peaceful sound. Jake felt a newfound confidence as a father, a sense of pride not in controlling his daughter, but in learning to understand her needs and respond with patience and care. He occasionally glanced at Clara, who met his eyes with a quiet nod, acknowledging the progress without speaking. No words were needed. The lesson had been taught and learned in silence and action. By the time the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the plains in shades of gold and orange, Jake felt a deep sense of gratitude. Clara had performed what he could only describe as unthinkable, not through magic or extreme measures, but through quiet, steady care and observation. She had shown him that sometimes the smallest acts, done with patience and thought, could change everything. And as the stagecoach continued on its path, carrying passengers through the endless expanse of the frontier, Jake held Lily with newfound confidence and warmth. He realized that he was not alone in this journey, that help could come from unexpected places, and that courage and strength sometimes wore the guise of calmness and understanding. Clara had shown him a new way to connect, to care, and to truly soothe, Not just a baby, but the heart of a father who had been struggling to understand his child. The stagecoach continued to bump along the uneven road, but inside, the atmosphere had transformed completely. What had been a tense, uncomfortable space filled with impatient passengers, and a crying baby was now calm and almost serene. Lily rested quietly in Jake's arms, her eyes wide with curiosity and wonder, occasionally reaching out to touch the soft doll Clara had used to soothe her. Jake himself sat back slightly, a mixture of relief, pride, and awe etched across his rugged features. Clara remained close by, watching the baby with gentle attention. She did not hover or interfere, but her presence carried a quiet assurance that seemed to ripple throughout the coach. Jake had grown used to the simple fact that she had brought peace into their small, rattling world, and now he began to notice something more. The way she moved, the calm confidence in her posture, and the quiet kindness that seemed to radiate from her in every gesture. He shifted Lily slightly in his arms, adjusting the blanket to keep her comfortable, and whispered softly, "You're all right now, Lily," thanks to her. His gaze met Clara's, and she gave him a faint nod and a reassuring smile. No words were needed between them. A connection had formed, built not on conversation, but on shared experience, trust, and quiet understanding. Jake realized, with a mixture of humility and admiration, that this woman had taught him something he could never have learned alone. The other passengers began to notice the change as well. The businessman who had been so impatient earlier now leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, his expression softening. "Well, I'll be," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. A few of the cowboys exchanged quiet glances, some of them smiling faintly, realizing that strength was not always measured by action or force, but sometimes by the patience and care one could offer. Even the little girl holding her doll across the aisle seemed mesmerized by the quiet bond forming between Jake, Lily, and Clara. Jake felt a subtle shift within himself. He had always considered himself a capable man, strong and resourceful in ways that the frontier demanded. But now he realized that he had been approaching fatherhood with the same mindset, solving problems through action and determination, rather than through observation, patience, and understanding. Clara had shown him that there were other ways to lead, to guide, and to care. He began to see the journey differently, not just as a passage across the plains, but as a lesson in humility and connection. The baby cooed softly, her tiny hands reaching up to touch Jake's face. He laughed quietly, the sound filled with warmth and relief. "You see," he said gently, "she's curious just like her dad." He glanced at Clara, who chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Curiosity is good," she said. "It's how they learn, how they discover the world. You just need to be patient and let them explore it safely." Jake nodded, taking in her words. There was wisdom in her calmness, and he felt grateful for her presence. They had not exchanged many words, yet he felt as if he had learned a lifetime of lessons from her in just a few hours. He realized that sometimes the greatest teachers were not those who spoke the loudest or acted the fastest, but those who observed, guided, and inspired through quiet action. As the stagecoach rattled on, Jake and Clara began to talk more. Their conversation was gentle, respectful, and easy, flowing naturally like a river around obstacles. They spoke about life on the frontier, about the challenges and joys of raising children, and about the resilience required to navigate both the wilderness and the hardships of life. Jake shared stories of the ranch, the long days under the sun, and the endless work that demanded every ounce of strength he had. Clara shared her experiences as a single mother, traveling alone, learning to face hardship with courage and determination. Through their conversation, Jake began to understand the depth of Clara's strength. She had faced challenges he could barely imagine, yet she carried herself with dignity, kindness, and quiet confidence. He realized that courage was not always measured by physical skill or daring feats, but by the ability to remain steadfast and compassionate, even in the most difficult circumstances. Clara's presence had not only calmed Lily, but had also given him a new perspective on life and parenthood. The other passengers began to warm to the pair as well. They observed Jake's gratitude, Clara's gentle demeanor, and the baby's contented presence. Some smiled quietly, feeling a sense of admiration for the unlikely friendship forming in the confined space of the stagecoach. One of the cowboys leaned over and whispered to his companion, "Never thought I'd see a man like Jake humbled by a little lady, but she's something else." His companion nodded, tipping his hat in silent acknowledgement of the quiet strength Clara displayed. Jake's heart felt full as he watched Lily's small face, serene and happy, following the gentle movements of Clara's hands as she continued to guide the baby's attention. He realized that parenthood was not a solitary journey, it was a partnership, a connection that required trust, patience, and learning from others. Clara had shown him that the support of someone who truly understood could make all the difference in the world, even in the harsh and unpredictable environment of the frontier. As the day wore on, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the plains. The light turned golden, illuminating the stagecoach and its passengers with a warm glow. The rattling of the wheels continued, but the atmosphere inside had changed entirely. Laughter, soft conversation, and the gentle coos of a happy baby filled the space, replacing the tension and irritation that had dominated earlier hours. Jake felt a sense of peace he had not experienced in a long time, a deep gratitude for the unexpected friendship and guidance Clara had offered. He glanced at her again, noting the calm determination in her eyes and the quiet strength in her posture. "I don't know how to thank you enough," he said softly. "You didn't just calm Lily, you've taught me something I'll never forget." Clara smiled, her eyes gentle. "You don't need to thank me," she replied. "We all learn from each other. You're a good father, Jake. You just needed a little help to see it." Jake felt a lump in his throat, touched by her words. He realized that strength, courage, and love often came in quiet ways, unseen by most, but deeply felt by those who experienced them. He had entered the stagecoach struggling and frustrated, and now he felt wiser, calmer, and more confident in his ability to care for Lily. He understood that true courage was not about proving oneself to others, but about learning, adapting, and embracing the guidance offered by those who cared. The passengers continued to observe the growing bond between Jake and Clara. The businessman, the cowboys, and even the little girl across the aisle watched with quiet admiration as the father and child interacted seamlessly, guided by Clara's gentle influence. It was a scene that spoke of human kindness, patience, and the power of connection in even the most challenging circumstances. As the sun continued to set, painting the plains in hues of orange, pink, and gold, Jake held Lily close, feeling her warmth and trust. He glanced once more at Clara, who nodded reassuringly, and he realized that the journey ahead would not seem so daunting now. He had learned to trust, to observe, and to accept guidance when it was offered with genuine care. The lesson would stay with him long after the stagecoach reached its final destination. By the time the evening air grew cooler, the stagecoach was moving smoothly along a long stretch of road, the horses' hooves beating a steady rhythm. Lily slept peacefully in Jake's arms, a small smile on her face as she dreamed. The passengers were relaxed, chatting quietly or watching the landscape drift by, and a sense of camaraderie had begun to form among them. The earlier tension had been replaced by admiration for Clara's calm strength and the quiet transformation she had brought to Jake and his daughter. Jake felt a deep sense of gratitude. He understood that Clara had not only helped him calm Lily, but had also shown him a new way to see the world, to approach challenges with patience, understanding, and quiet determination. He realized that the bond between parent and child was strengthened not just by love, but by the wisdom and guidance of those who walked beside them, offering support in unexpected ways. And as the stars began to emerge in the twilight sky, casting their soft light over the plains, Jake held Lily close, feeling the warmth of her small body and the trust in her eyes. He looked at Clara one last time, silently acknowledging the lessons she had imparted. In that moment, he understood that life's greatest strengths often came from the quiet, unassuming acts of those willing to share their wisdom, patience, and compassion. The journey was far from over, but the stagecoach now carried more than passengers. It carried understanding, friendship, and a newfound respect that would last far longer than the ride itself. Jake knew that he had been forever changed by this experience, and that the bond he had begun to form with Clara would remain a guiding light in the many days and challenges yet to come. The stagecoach rumbled steadily along the dusty road, the sound of the horses' hooves echoing across the wide-open plains. The sun had dipped low, and a soft golden light bathed the landscape, turning the rolling hills and scattered cacti into warm, glowing silhouettes. Inside the coach, the mood was calm and peaceful. The earlier chaos of a crying baby had vanished, replaced by a quiet sense of relief, contentment, and a shared understanding among the passengers. Lily slept soundly in Jake's arms, her tiny chest rising and falling gently with each breath. Her face was relaxed, the earlier tension replaced by a serenity that seemed almost magical to witness. Jake held her close, careful not to disturb her rest, and a deep sense of gratitude filled his heart. The exhaustion he had felt earlier, physical, mental, and emotional, had eased, replaced by pride, joy, and an unexpected calm. He glanced at Clara, who sat nearby, quietly observing, her eyes kind and reassuring. Jake's mind drifted as he held his daughter, thinking about the events of the day. He realized that the journey had been more than a physical trip across the plains. It had been a journey of learning, patience, and understanding. He had entered the stagecoach frustrated and overwhelmed, unsure of how to soothe his crying daughter, and now he felt transformed. He had witnessed a simple but profound act of care and connection, and it had changed the way he viewed himself, his daughter, and the meaning of strength. Clara noticed Jake's thoughtful expression and gave him a gentle smile. "She's a remarkable little one," she said softly. "Strong, curious, and full of life. You've done well." Jake's gaze met hers, and he felt a mixture of relief and admiration. I couldn't have done it without you," he admitted, his voice quiet but sincere. "I tried everything I knew, but nothing worked until you stepped in." "I don't know how to thank you." Clara shook her head lightly. "You don't need to thank me," she said. "Sometimes all it takes is a little patience and understanding. You've been a good father all along. You just needed a moment to see it in yourself." Her words carried a warmth that made Jake's chest tighten. He realized she was right. The strength to care for Lily had always been within him. He had simply needed guidance to recognize it. The passengers, who had been quietly observing the interactions, began to speak among themselves in hushed tones. There was admiration in their voices, a newfound respect for both Jake and Clara. The businessman, who had been skeptical earlier, leaned back and said quietly to a nearby cowboy, "I've seen a lot in my life, but that was something else. Patience, calmness, real strength doesn't always shout." The cowboy nodded, tipping his hat, while the little girl across the aisle smiled, holding her doll close as if inspired by the gentle lessons she had witnessed. Jake felt a warmth in his heart as he noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The stagecoach, once a place of tension and frustration, had become a space of shared understanding and quiet admiration. The experience had not only strengthened his bond with Lily, but it also revealed the power of human connection, kindness, and patience. He realized that life on the frontier was full of challenges that could not always be faced alone, and that sometimes the help of a kind stranger could make all the difference. As the coach continued along the road, Jake reflected on Clara's guidance. She had shown him that true courage and strength were not measured by physical skill or toughness alone, but by the ability to care, to observe, and to act with patience and empathy. He realized that parenting, much like life on the frontier, required adaptability, understanding, and the willingness to learn from others. Clara's unassuming presence had taught him that even the smallest gestures, when done with love and attention, could create profound change. The baby stirred slightly in Jake's arms, letting out a tiny yawn, and he smiled down at her. "See," he whispered, "you're safe, you're loved, and everything's all right." Lily's eyes fluttered open, meeting his gaze with trust and recognition. In that moment, Jake felt an overwhelming sense of connection. Between father and daughter, between strangers who had come together in a moment of need, and between the passengers who had witnessed the power of kindness and patience firsthand. Clara watched quietly, her expression soft but knowing. She understood the significance of the moment, not just for Jake and Lily, but for the passengers as well. The day had demonstrated that courage could take many forms, that understanding and compassion could be just as powerful as any physical act of bravery, and that human connections, no matter how brief, could leave lasting impressions. The stagecoach driver called out, signaling that they were approaching the next town. The horses picked up their pace slightly, their hooves clattering rhythmically against the uneven road. Dust swirled in the air outside, catching the light of the setting sun and creating a golden haze over the plains. Jake adjusted Lily carefully in his arms, making sure she remained comfortable, and looked around the coach at the other passengers. There was a sense of quiet camaraderie now, a shared acknowledgement of the lessons learned and the small miracles witnessed on this journey. As the town came into view, a cluster of simple wooden buildings nestled against the horizon, Jake felt a sense of readiness and confidence he had not known before. The challenges of parenting, the uncertainties of life on the frontier, and the struggles of the day no longer felt insurmountable. He had learned to trust in his own abilities, to remain patient, and to embrace guidance when it was offered with genuine care. The experience had left him stronger, wiser, and more connected to those around him. Clara rose slightly, gathering her small bag, ready to disembark. She had accomplished what she had set out to do, and her quiet influence had left a lasting impression on Jake, Lily, and the passengers. Jake felt a pang of gratitude as he prepared to say goodbye, knowing that he might never see her again, yet understanding that her presence had already changed him forever. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'll never forget what you did today for Lily, for me, for all of us." Clara smiled warmly, her eyes meeting his. "Take care of her," she replied gently, "and take care of yourself. You're stronger than you realize, Jake. Always remember that." She stepped carefully from the stagecoach, her presence quiet yet commanding, leaving behind a sense of calm and wisdom that lingered in the air. As the stagecoach moved through the town, dropping off passengers and picking up supplies, Jake held Lily close, reflecting on the journey and the lessons he had learned. The world beyond the coach was vast, unpredictable, and often harsh, but he now understood that patience, understanding, and connection could provide a guiding light even in the most challenging circumstances. The passengers who remained on the coach chatted quietly, sharing their own impressions of the day. The businessman shook his head in disbelief. The cowboys nodded in quiet respect, and the little girl across the aisle whispered to her mother about the courage and kindness she had witnessed. The small acts of guidance, patience, and care had left an impression far greater than anyone could have imagined, demonstrating that even in a world full of challenges, the smallest gestures could create profound and lasting change. Jake gazed out of the window as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink, orange, and purple. He felt a deep sense of peace, holding Lily close and knowing that the lessons of the day would stay with him forever. The experience had strengthened the bond between father and daughter, revealed the quiet power of human kindness, and shown him that courage and strength could come in many forms, often in ways he had never expected. As night fell over the plains, the stagecoach continued its journey under a canopy of stars, the sound of hooves clattering softly against the road. Jake held Lily in his arms, watching her sleep peacefully, and felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected guidance, friendship, and lessons Clara had provided. He knew that he had been forever changed, that he had learned to see the world, his child, and himself in a new light. And as the stagecoach rolled onward, carrying passengers through the quiet night, Jake understood that life's greatest lessons often came from unexpected places, from the small acts of courage, patience, and kindness offered by those willing to step in when they were needed most. He had entered the day exhausted, frustrated, and unsure, and he would leave it stronger, wiser, and filled with hope. Lily, too, had experienced the comfort and safety of understanding and care, and together they would face the frontier with renewed confidence and love. The journey was far from over, but for Jake, Lily, and the passengers who had witnessed the quiet miracle of the day, the world now seemed a little brighter, a little kinder, and a little more full of hope than it had at sunrise. And the memory of a stranger who had done the unthinkable, simply by offering calm, understanding, and care, would stay with them forever, a reminder that sometimes the smallest, gentlest actions could leave the biggest marks on the heart.